When I went back and studied Naruto, I noticed something strange. The art is much simpler than I remembered. Entire outfits are just solid black. Hair is often just black and white. Screen tones barely appear, and yet somehow it looks professional. So today I'm gonna dive into Naruto and see how this was pulled off. One of the first anime I ever watched was Naruto. Now that years have passed, I've come back to study it as a manga artist. Naruto's style changed a lot over its run. As the anime became more popular, the manga gradually shifted towards that cleaner, more mature look you see in the anime. Despite these changes, one thing stayed surprisingly consistent: the simplicity. The deeper I looked, the more I realized that Naruto isn't impressive because of how much detail it has, but because of how much detail it seems to leave out. That's a good line. Let's start with the most obvious thing. Large areas of black are treated as simple shapes. Look at this backpack. It's basically just a black silhouette. There's no wrinkles, textures, or screen tones. The only extra detail is a thin white line used to separate the forms. The same thing happens with clothing, accessories, and even hair. Most manga artists are tempted to keep adding detail. Kishimoto does the opposite. He simplifies everything until only the important information remains. Even the eyes are extremely simple most of the time. Often they're just one or two black circles. Only during emotional moments do they become more detailed. The whites follow the exact same philosophy. Large white areas are left alone unless a detail is absolutely necessary. Everything serves readability first. Of course, this raised a question for me. What happens when a character is mostly white? Kishimoto has a few solutions. First, he often uses a thicker outline around white characters to separate them from the background. Naruto rarely uses screen tone overall, but all white designs seem to be one of the few exceptions. The lesson here is simple: a character doesn't need to be detailed to stand out, it just needs contrast. The next thing I noticed was how little hatching there actually is, at least for characters. When hatching appears, it's usually doing one of two jobs. Either it's adding emotion to a scene, or it's adding just enough depth to keep something from feeling flat. What's interesting is that the lines usually travel in the same direction. There's very little cross-hatching, none that I could find honestly, but there is hatching, which is just all these one-directional lines. My guess is that cross-hatching creates visual noise. Keeping everything in one direction makes the page cleaner and easier to read. Again, simplicity wins. This was probably the biggest surprise. Naruto barely uses screen tones, and when they do appear, it's often just a single shade. They're usually used for depth, flashbacks, or emotional scenes. Sometimes you'll see a subtle gradient in darker environments like caves, underground areas, or night scenes. But the important lesson is this: screen tones aren't carrying the artwork, the inking is. A lot of beginners use screen tones as a shortcut. If something feels unfinished, we'll add more screen tone. Naruto shows the opposite approach. If the drawing doesn't work in pure black and white, screen tones won't fix it. Write this one down. This one's also out of the ordinary. Naruto's line weight is actually pretty consistent. There is variation, but it's subtle. When thicker lines appear, they're usually helping a form feel heavier or more three-dimensional. This is deceptively simple because if you make your lines too uniform, your drawing will look artificial. Some slight line variation will make it feel more lively and traditionally manga looking. Of course, character design is only half the battle. A character can only stand out if the background lets them. One thing I noticed while studying Naruto is the backgrounds almost never use large black shapes. At first that seemed weird, but it makes complete sense. Many Naruto characters rely heavily on black clothing, hair, and accessories. If the backgrounds were also filled with large black shapes, the characters would blend in and become harder to read. Instead, the backgrounds are usually made up of line work and hatching, while the characters carry most of the heavy contrast. This creates a clear visual hierarchy. Your eyes immediately know where to look. The human eye is naturally drawn to areas of high contrast, and Kishimoto uses that to guide the reader through each panel. And finally, there is screen tone. Most backgrounds rely on line work and simple one-directional hatching. In fact, I had to flip through 5 chapters before I found an example of screen tone being used in a background. And even then, it was subtle. It was used for atmosphere, flashbacks, or depth. This is also a good lesson for digital artists like me. If you're using 3D models for backgrounds, it's worth taking the extra time to draw over them with a G pen or Maru pen. The human eye is surprisingly good at telling when a 3D model has been used. When they stand out too much, a page can start to feel cheap. Manga was originally created traditionally, so the closer we can get to that hand-drawn feeling, the more professional the page tends to look. As artists, we often think adding more detail will make our work better. But Naruto shows us that isn't true. Sometimes the hardest thing to draw is only what's necessary.